Hello, everybody. This is Rob Fredette with the podcast HODGEPOD, back for another episode. And this is going to be quite a story that you're going to listen to in the next few minutes. Mike Smith, who served in the United States Air Force, has a story to share because at one point in his life, he was homeless. And he has said, in his own words, God rescued me so I could help others who struggle with mental illness and addiction and love. Mike Smith, thank you for service to the United States and the Air Force, and welcome to HODGEPOD.
Thank you, Rob. I'm glad to be here and share my story and my journey in life with you. So thank you for having me on the show.
You have quite a story to tell. So if you could just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about your life as it is through today. And I'm looking forward to talking to you. So welcome.
Yeah. Well, I just like to start in the beginning when I was just a little child, and it'll give you guys context as to kind of how I wound up in the homeless shelters. I was actually in two different ones. So I was born in Aberdeen, South Dakota. My dad was the manager for the J.C. Penney clothing store chain. And as a result, we moved around a lot. They would transfer him. So when I was 3 years of age, living in Aberdeen, they transferred him from there up to Sauk Center, Minnesota. So grew up there in central Minnesota until I was at the age of 12 years old. And at that point in life, I should mention I have four siblings. So my parents had five kids to feed and take care of. And I was the second youngest out of the five. So I have an older brother, two older sisters, and a younger sister. So my point being is that my dad was fired from that J.C. Penney job for either drinking on the job or something related to that. And so they were out of options when I was at age 12. So they moved the family. He had this dream that he could start his own clothing store up in a little town nobody's ever heard of called Barnesville, Minnesota, population of 2,000 people roughly, which is about a half hour outside of Fargo, North Dakota, where I live to this day. So anyway, at the age of 12, moving up there, I didn't have any friends. I was put into Catholic school. I should mention that. We were Irish Catholic, born into that. I was an altar boy when I was growing up. And so that was my introduction to the church. But anyway, I started getting involved once I went into the public school at age 12. I met a buddy of mine that the only friend I had. We started smoking pot and drinking together and messing around with that stuff at a very early age. So fast forward from age 12 up 3 years later to age 15, my dad dies of a massive heart attack. And at that point in my life, Rob, I had my first suicide attempt at age 15 because my mom was making it clear to the family, guys, we're losing everything. We're losing our house to the bank. We're losing our store to the bank. We have no income. So it's basically every man for himself. So I kind of hung on. We barely were making it with what was left of the clothing store. She tried running it. My mom did on her own, but really didn't know what she was doing. So kind of limped out of there into the Air Force when I graduated. So that's how I wound up in the military. So patterns didn't change for me. I just looked at the Air Force, and it says it in their slogan, aim high. So I did, and was smoking pot in the Air Force. And 2.5 years into my military service, myself and 11 other people got caught smoking marijuana. And that was back in the 80s when Nancy Reagan had her big war on drugs. So they kicked our sorry rear ends out the back gate. And I wound up with a buddy of mine, an ex-Marine with a fifth degree black belt in Taekwondo, renting a little house over in Moorhead, Minnesota by the campus. And we just worked out all the time. You know, you mentioned to me that you're really into fitness. That guy, man, he got me in the best shape of my life, just working out every day. And looking back on my life now, I can say that was the best time of my life that I had, being clean of all the chemicals and just hitting in the gym 6 days a week, lifting and running and, playing racquetball and that. But anyway, so if you were to go on my website, you can see the first sample chapter. I put 2 on my website. I experienced my first manic episode 8 years after my dad died. And that was when I was training and, like I said, chemical free and all this other stuff. So it was myself just alone. My buddy, my workout buddy, was at his job, and I experienced what you'll read about. I don't remember. I can pull it up and show you the name of the sample chapter I'm referencing here. Hang on one second. It says, "Do you know your enemy? Catch my fall." And so you can check that out. That's the third heading on my website. There's the home page, then there's the help for everyone tab, and then the sample chapters. But anyway, so I talk about what it was like to experience my dad showing up, and the imagery, the voices, the torment, all that stuff at the age of 23. So that was exactly 8 years after he had died of that heart attack that I mentioned. And he was telling me, grab the shotgun and blow your worthless effing head off because everybody thinks you're a joke. So I looked outside and I saw all these cars driving by, people I recognize, and it was all in my mind. But that's what it's like to have a manic episode. And in my life, I've had several manic episodes. That was one that was severe, but I had even another one that's the second sample chapter on my website that was even worse 11 years later in my life, right before Thanksgiving in 1999. I was put into a straitjacket and I experienced in a padded cell for 3 straight days what it would be like if I were to be in hell forever. And I was bouncing off the walls and just cycling severely. I remember coming out of it, just seeing this little light after experiencing that after 3 days. And this nurse was standing over me. I get emotional when I talk about it, but it's the gospel truth. So anyway, she was standing over me and she said to me, I'll never forget. She goes, "Mike, I'm your nurse today. I'm Nurse Amy. How are you doing?" So I was so scared that I couldn't talk. I couldn't get anything out, right? Going through that. So fast forward after that episode, a few days later, Nurse Amy comes in and talks to me and says, "Mike, I've never seen somebody look the way you looked coming out of something after you went through that. You look like you were a cornered animal and your eyes were as big as saucers." So going through that, it was so hard on me and my family because, the people that came and got me in the straitjacket, my son witnessed when he was only years old. So you can about imagine how much of an impact that put on my life. But I always tell people these days, Rob, I said, I think I had to go through all that suffering in my life, basically because these days, when you forward through all of it, the entire book, that I really have an empathy for people that have gone through similar problems in their life had I not gone through those episodes. When I do these podcasts now to get my word out, that's what I always share with people is I always say, God has a purpose for everybody in life. No two people are alike. They're all created with their own individual talents to touch people for the kingdom of God. That's why we're here. And that's what comes out of the book when you read through it. There's all those dark chapters, but then in the end, the name of the book is The Gutter Gospel, of course, but then the subtitle is The Road to Redemption. So these days, as I was sharing with you before we started talking here now, was that these days I do all these small men's groups and stay involved with that. So that kind of keeps me on the straight and narrow now, and enjoy that a lot. So, but yeah, it was quite a wild ride. And in a nutshell, that takes you from when I was born in Aberdeen up until now, living and being able to reach people all over the globe with this message through these podcast platforms. And I consider myself blessed. I have all these custom shirts. I don't know if you can read it, but there's two crosses here that say 22 veterans per day, which is a symbol for how many veterans per day take their own life. So then I have on here the rest of it that says former homeless veteran shares his true life story at theguttergospel.com. So a lot of brand awareness. I get all my custom shirts made out on the East Coast through Custom Ink, and I wear them everywhere I go. I have every color under the moon and sky that you can imagine with all that custom gear on it. So my wife says that I wasted thousands of dollars on it,
Hey, it's
but
for
to
a
me,
purpose.
yeah, it brought purpose to my life, and it's like brand awareness. I have custom wristbands that have my logo on it, the Gutter Gospel with two crosses. So everywhere I go, I hand those out. I love going up to the VA. We got all the guys, up there that look at my shirts, and that just opens up the conversation to get talking to those guys that are going through the same type of stuff that I had to go through. I had to live in two different homeless shelters. I had two civil commitments placed on me, both in the state of North Dakota and in Minnesota. So I lost my freedoms, and they put me in chains. And then they shuttled me after I was in the county jail for about 10 days, covered in my own feces, cycling out of my mind and completely naked. My doctor came and visited me, and he said, Mike's so out of it, we need to get him institutionalized. So when I choke up and share these messages with you, Rob, and others, it's that I lived it, and you can read all about it in my book. And I shared with you about getting it published, that I don't charge anything for the book because it's about awareness that people out there, especially as our culture gets farther and farther gone into the gutter, that this message resonates with people because everybody in their family has somebody that's either struggling with addiction or suicide or you name it. And every family faces those challenges. We all face challenges in life. So it's a matter of offering people hope. That's why I put those help for everyone. I put that help for everyone tab on my website. There's links in there. You can call for the prayer line or the suicide lines or whatever. The Veterans Crisis line is up there. So, but anyway, like I wrap it up with everybody saying that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, that's amazing. So would you say that you hit rock bottom when you were in solitary confinement for 3 days? Was that your rock bottom moment?
No, that wasn't my rock bottom moment, Rob, because that's a good question, though, because I didn't know how to cope at that point. So what I was doing, to cope, I was drinking very out of control, even more so then, because who do you share that with that could relate to that story and not think you're completely off your rocker and nuts and show empathy towards me, which is what I desperately needed. I didn't need to have judgment on me placed. So my rock bottom, if you want to say I ever hit one, was feeling alone and isolated in the state institution for those 6 weeks out at the state hospital. And I'll share this with you, Rob, and your audience, is that when I really wanted to give up hope, I had two suicide attempts. I should back up a little bit. One was when I was 15, like I told you about. The other one was after this 99 episode. I lost my good job as a manager of the city transit system after that took place. And then the only job I could find after getting fired from that was driving a cab at night with all the drunks, jumping from bar to bar and making fun of me and this, that, and the other thing. So I went down into the basement of my house and tried to hang myself. And there was a still small voice when I was stringing myself up that said, Mike, you still have a purpose for your life, you know?
Mhm.
And that just resonated with me. So to answer your question more directly, the rock bottom happened in the state institution years later after 2 homeless shelters and the civil commitments, and then being institutionalized, shuffled around to all the courts, in chains, having to beg for my freedom. There was this plaque in the state institution that gave me hope, which I'd like to share with everybody here. And it said, "You've been given this life because you're strong enough to live it."
Mhm.
And that's the message I hope resonates with everybody that's listening to me today on this show, is that you were created for a purpose. Every one of us was. And you have been given this life with talents that you only possess. That God created you before the foundations of the world, it says in the Bible. He knew exactly that your days would be numbered. He knows the number of hairs on your head, and he knows that you've got gifts and talents. And the enemy on the planet comes to kill, steal, and destroy, and it says in the Bible. And I'm not here to preach the gospel. What I am here to say is that that's just the facts, that everybody has to go through challenges, and you are unique. I was talking to this lady as an example just this past week out in Hawaii. Sweetest lady, does this podcast out there, and she was born without any arms, right? So she's taken notes and listened to me on the podcast. And she just wrote me today the sweetest letter I can forward to you about how much she appreciated me being on her podcast, share my testimony. So I really get a lot out of this, by it's therapy for me. And I love being able to share my voice these days from the comfort of my own home, and just getting that message out that there's hope for people no matter what you go through in life. Mike's gone through more. Look
Yeah.
at it that way.
One thing I always say, no matter how bad it gets, every day's a gift. Doesn't matter how bad your day is, every day's a gift. Enjoy it, live it.
Yes.
Some days are harder than others, but when those days are harder, you fight through it, and that helps build you up, hopefully, for a lot of people. Life is tough. Sometimes life is tough, and maybe it's tougher for some people. You went through hell. And if I could just say editorial comment, screw the drunks that yelled at you, made fun of you in the cab. They can all shove it, okay? That's number one.
Right.
So you talked about veterans, 22 a day commit suicide.
Yeah. And you know what? If you were to go online right now, Rob, because my brother corrected me, he's always my guardian angel and he's my big brother. I love him to death. But he picks on me still to this day. And he said, Mike, if you're going to go out there with all that custom gear and sharing your testimony and all this other stuff, make sure you got your facts straight. It's not 22 per day anymore. It's 17.6, according to if you go Google that. So what I told him in my response to that was to say, okay, I'm going to share that message to everybody when I do go on their shows and say that number of 17.6, that's current number, is still far too high,
Hmm.
but it's a show of progress being made, or the fact that you can look at it that there just aren't that many around anymore that are Vietnam era Vietnam people that served during that time. They are one of the highest number of people that take their own lives. And I just got done talking to a good buddy of mine today that's a Vietnam vet. I'll share his testimony with you here because I think it'll help you out. When he was in Vietnam, he suffers from PTSD, very, very bad. And the way he copes is he works 2 jobs full time, right? But so when he was in combat, there was a guy that was giving up their position when they were pinned down, and Tom blew his head off, had to make sure that they weren't killed. They weren't all killed. So he silenced the guy that was freaking out. And as a result, he works 2 full-time jobs and only can sleep like 3, 4 hours a day just to cope in life. I got a picture of him with me that I can forward to you. You're gonna love it. You can tell he's old and gray with a long ponytail, but he's the nicest guy you'd ever wanna meet. And he works at the post office today. He shared with me that, with all the cuts now going on, he's the guy that's been in the post office the longest because he's been there since he got out of the military from Vietnam era. So he's going to be losing his job. He's not too happy with everything these days. He's like number 100 and something because he's been there over 50 years. So they're phasing him out.
We still have World War II veterans still living, but I see a lot of Vietnam veterans in my travels, not every day, but when I do see them, I always thank them for their service, number one. And some of the stories they tell are just excruciating. And if they offer, I don't ask, but they do, they'll volunteer anything they want to say. And it's quite horrific. They should be thanked. Anytime I see a veteran, I thank them for their service. Doesn't matter what war it was, or if they're just wearing something, right. A veteran, always thank a veteran for their service because it goes a long way. Don't you think?
Oh, it does, Tom. Or yeah, Rob, you're right. You nailed it. I'll share this with you too, that when I was in one of the treatment centers with all the other veterans, I went to this place down in St. Cloud, Minnesota. It's a great big regional hospital, beautiful complex. And, you know, when I was down there, I was standing in line to get my medications, and I was just sharing my testimony about kicked out for smoking pot after 2.5 years. And I said, there's a part of me that really, doesn't think that I really am a veteran because I dishonored my service by screwing around, And the guy goes to me that I told that to, said, Mike, you're as much of a veteran as anybody I'd ever met. We all have struggles in life. And that's kind of fed into my pitch that I give everybody these days. Nice guy. And veterans, they serve their country and don't ask for a lot in return. But if you look at suicide rates, they're among the highest in the country. Coming out, trying to transition after being in the service and going back out into the public, for some reason, that's a big challenge for veterans, which is why I have the custom gear, spent all that money to invest in that, put up the website, wrote the book, finished the book, everything I can do to bring awareness and say, you know what, guys, thank you so much for all you did. I share Tom's story with people and say, I hope this resonates with people that hear my story, and then they can forward that information, and the veterans will maybe be even a little bit higher, or respect, I should say, or both. And yeah, veterans are rare birds.
Yes, they are. And I spoke to a veteran from World War II. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, and I was just like blown away. He talked a little bit about it, and I was just like in awe of him more than anything. It was just amazing. And I thanked him profusely for his service. You mentioned your book. What's the name of your book?
Yeah, the name of the book, guys, is The Gutter Gospel is the main title, and that's the website, theguttergospel.com, if you want to look it up. So the name of the book is The Gutter Gospel, and the subtitle is The Road to Redemption. So it talks all throughout the book about all the challenges I've been talking about here now with you guys, but then the road to redemption, how God can redeem anybody. And there's stories throughout the Bible about all these guys that God had in the gutter, in life. That's why I named it The Gutter Gospel. My favorite, I'll share this with you. After The Gutter Gospel, The Road to Redemption, and again, you can get that for free at the bottom of my homepage on theguttergospel.com homepage. Just scroll down to the bottom and it opens right up into the PDF, and you can read all about it, as I say. But yeah, it was a wild ride, and God bless you for having me on tonight, Rob, and giving me your platform to share my story with everybody. And thank everybody that has me on so I can get the word out about struggle in life and saying to them all, God just dragged me through the gutter, and we've all been through the gutter in one point of our life or the other and had our struggles. And the good news is the road to redemption always leads back to the Creator. And my favorite psalm out of the Bible is Psalm 40 because it talks about right in the beginning, He pulled me out of the miry pit. And that is the redeeming story throughout the book. If you read all the dark times, there's hope and blessings in the end for anybody that is really seeking it. So, yeah, God bless.
Prior to getting on, I had read that you are trying to get a pitch or a presentation for a movie. Is that correct?
Yeah, out at ICVM Storytellers Conference. That's coming up Orlando 1st to the 4th. What happens out there is that all of the faith-based producers, directors, investors, they all come out there every year. And I don't know if you, Rob, or your listeners have ever seen the TV series called The Chosen, but the people that produce that, the name of the studio is Angel Studios, produce The Chosen. And I've tried repeatedly in the past to try and pitch my story to Angel Studios outside of the conference. And they flat out reject everybody. The only time you can ever get in front of those people to pitch your idea for a
Wow.
faith-based film is at the conference. So that's why I'm going to the conference
Wow.
October 1st through the 4th. And let's just say our prayers that it gets out there because I think it can really reach a lot of people. It's not about being famous or anything else. It's about telling the story that I just shared with you to a broader audience. So that's what makes me tick these days. That's why I give away the book for free. That's why I do all the podcast interviews. And that's why this week we're working on setting up our social media profiles. I have an intern up in Grand Forks that's been on vacation, spring break. She's a senior in college. So she went to Spain. So we were lacking getting behind the eight ball, putting up our social media profiles, but they'll be up this week. So that's how you guys can get in contact with me. And before we close our night tonight, I wanted to also share that if you want to reach me directly, there's two ways to do it right now before the social media stuff gets up, and that's the contact page on my website at theguttergospel.com. You can reach me. And then also just really simply, Mike at theguttergospel.com. Those two ways go directly to me. And I do my best in between doing interviews to answer those people that reach out to me and ask me questions. So that's what God's got in store for me these days. And it keeps me plenty busy, as you can about imagine, between that and taking care of my three dogs that you can probably hear in the background.
Yeah, I heard one of them. I heard one of them early. I liked it. I thought that was awesome. That should be, you know what? When you go to Orlando, it's going to be a piece of cake compared to what you've been through to pitch this to a movie producer or movie company. It's quite a story.
Yeah, I know. And that's what people tell me. And it gives me a lot of practice and a lot of solace to hear that. They have a thing at the conference they call the popcorn night. And the popcorn night basically is they give you 5 minutes uninterrupted to get up there and condense what I just shared with you into 5 minutes and say, okay, here's my story. And this is why I think it's a good idea that would touch and resonate with a lot of people. So popcorn night is part of the conference.
And Orlando's not too bad to go to either.
You know what? It's funny, Rob. I just this past weekend went down to a hockey tournament in South Dakota to see my niece play with my wife. Brett, and I invited a cousin of mine to come up and have dinner with us that I have not seen since my wife passed. Well, I'm sorry, my mom passed away almost 20 years ago from cancer. So him and his brothers and sisters all came up for the conference, and come to find out, his older brother Kevin lives in Orlando. So he Kevin's contact information. I shared with him I'm coming down, so he's excited about that. And I have other relatives living in Jacksonville, so that's not far from Orlando. So I'm really looking forward to the conference.
So talk about, if you would, you said you meet with groups during the week. So how does that go? And that must give you great satisfaction when you meet with groups, and I guess when you see improvement or people improving in their lives.
Right, as well as, when I do get responses through my contacts that I just shared with you and people saying, "Hey, that really resonated with me," you know, because they can hear it's not crocodile tears when I start to get choked up. It was hell to go through it, and it's sincerity. That's what resonates with people is A, it's true. B, why in the hell would somebody go through all of that and make it all up? And that actually ties back into when I started writing. I'll share this with you. This will make you laugh. And it's the truth how my book actually got started. 30 years ago, there was this idiot that went on Oprah Winfrey for her book club, and he had a book he wrote called A Million Pieces. You ever heard of it?
No.
Anyway, he goes on there and shares all this hard times he'd been through and everything else. And Oprah thought, oh, wow, what an amazing story and what an amazing journey. Then that night, everybody called into the show that knew the guy or knew quite a bit about the guy or something about the guy and said it's all fabricated. He might have gone through a little bit of that in his
Oh,
life, but he's basically full of BS. So she invited him back the next day to have him come back on the show and just chew his ass. And so I joke and I said this is true. I turned to my wife and I said, I could write a better book because all the stuff I've been through in my life is true. Cause that was after the 99 episode. So I started writing and that started the process.
wow.
And
Wow.
the rest is history, as they say.
Wow. I don't remember that one about the Oprah Winfrey show. I'm going to have to look that up after we get off here. That's an unbelievable story. I remember her book club. I mean, people would go on her show and then the book
Yeah.
would be New York Times bestsellers like that week.
Yeah, I know. And I was at the VA a couple of weeks back and in the ER for some health concerns. And this lady comes in, starts talking to me about this book she picked up at a secondhand bookstore called A Million Pieces. She talked about that book saying, you should read it. So I handed her a wristband. I said, that crap is all made up. The guy's an idiot, but at least he got on national TV.
My
But he did
God.
get his ass chewed too, though.
Wow.
Yeah, so I
That,
handed her a wristband. She goes, I'll have to check your book out because it sounds like it's the real deal. And I said, it is. You got to read all about it. And the best part is it's free and it's true. So there you go. Yeah.
I've seen a quote that you have like quotated. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you understand why. And that was by Mark Twain. Explain that, why that's so important to you.
Yeah, because once you figure out why God created you, and I shared this a little while ago with you, is that we're all here for a purpose, and life without purpose, you've heard of the purpose driven life that Rick Warren wrote that book, and I have that in my library. And that's what it's about, having to go through all those hard times now, like I said earlier, gives me a lot of empathy towards people that are struggling with one or two or multiple problems that I can sit down with if I've given the time and say, you know what? I've been there, man. I can understand what you're going through. And my heart goes out to you. I'll share this with you before we close. When I was in one of those psych units, this doctor comes up to me and he's got this big stack of files. This was one of the last facilities I was in, and it was all my medical records from bouncing around through all these things I had to endure. So he puts all those files on the table, and here's what his quote was to me, Rob. He said, "Mike, let me be the first, if no one's ever said this to you in your life. to say how sorry I am that you had to go through all this shit in your life. Pardon the cussing, but that's what he said. And it hurt. It hit me. I just started sobbing because it was like the guy had empathy on me. And the reason I shared that with you is I have empathy now because I had to endure all that crap, to use a cleaner word. And now God's blessing it so I can reach a broader audience that I never would have been able to had I not gone through all those things in my life. I would have just been some other schmo working a 9 to 5, getting by. And, I remember a quote. I'm from Minnesota, is where I grew up, like I shared earlier. And I saw this thing about Prince, this documentary after he passed away. And his friend, one of his good friends, was interviewed for the documentary. And they said to him, here's this quote. He said, I think Prince would have been a lot happier in life had he just grown up and worked a normal job, had a couple kids, and just never made it big. Because think of it this way, Rob, look at all the people that do, quote unquote, make it, and how miserable their lives become once they do. There was this picture that I saw in this documentary about Prince. There was him out in front of this big cathedral overseas somewhere. I think it was in Spain or somewhere over there, all dressed up in his custom suits that he wore. And the comment was from the photographer. I remember snapping that photo and thinking about him, that he must have been the loneliest man on the planet, because once you get to that point, there's nobody around you to stop you to say, no, that's going to kill you or that's bad for you. So you look at how he ended up dying of an overdose from fentanyl, living in his big mansion.
Yeah,
So that's not my goal.
I remember when he passed away. That was like 2016. If I remember, he passed away.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
quite tragic when that happened. You mentioned empathy. That's a great word that there could be a lot more in this world we have today. And then also the redemption. Redemption is another word that you never hear about. You never hear about redemption. If people had empathy and patience, this world would be so much better.
Exactly. Well said, Rob. That's very well said. Yes, sir. You're exactly right.
Mike Smith, I want to thank you very much for coming on my podcast. And maybe after you come back from sunny Orlando in October, you can come back on and we can talk about, hopefully you'll have a movie deal and you can get the word out. And I think you're going to get it because, like I said earlier, you'll knock it out of the park down there. I really want to thank you very much for coming on. I know it was very emotional for you to come on. Your story really hit home with me.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Rob, and all the best to you and your future endeavors with your podcast, your cycling classes that you shared with me. And do me a favor and get me that Van Halen stuff that we were talking about. And I'll do you a favor, send you off some photos of the custom gear. I'll email that to you and you'll be able to see those. I think you'll get a kick out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we found out before we talked, we're a big Van Halen fan. So we talked about that as well. Mike, thank you very much. And I'll be looking for you on other podcasts. And thank you.
Amen, brother. God bless you, Rob. Take care.